Didn't want to have this discussion, not this early in the season, not really at any point in the season, but it would be irresponsible of us not to ask the question as Auburn heads into its bye week at 3-2 overall, 0-2 in the SEC with two ugly losses to Oklahoma and Texas A&M. Why should Auburn still believe in Hugh Freeze? It's a question. It's not a statement. However, I have a distinct lean. As you probably already know, if you read my column this morning in the Birmingham News or on AL.com, I have my doubts. I had my doubts when they hired Hugh Freeze to follow Brian Harsin, and those doubts have not been assuaged. Is that a word? I think it's a word. Look it up. Good morning, everyone. Good day, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening. Whenever you're watching or listening, I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. This is Scarbo Knows, and we've got a lot to get into today after week 5 of the college football season. First of all, we want to say thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services, Birmingham's financial advisors, the Rice family, good friends of mine. They will take great care of you. Check out the QR code, look them up, give them a call. You'll hear more from them later in the show. So where do we begin with the state of the Auburn football program? While Alabama reestablished itself to some degree by going to Georgia and doing what they normally do, as we told you at the end of last week, they probably would do what we predicted they would do. They beat Georgia again, and Kirby Smart falls to 1-7 against his biggest rival. A lot of teams establishing themselves. Oregon going to Penn State, defeating the whiteout, handing James Franklin yet another in a long series of losses against top 5, top 10 teams. You know, when coaches show you who they are, at some point you should believe them. And that's where we are with Hugh Freeze. Another, not just an ugly loss, just a dispiriting loss, a disheartening loss. I've heard from my friends who are Auburn fans, and they are, well, they're pulling their hair out. They're banging their head against the wall. They feel like the program is banging its head against the wall because we've seen this movie before. We've seen it with Hugh Freeze. We've seen it with previous coaches. We saw it with Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss. And that was really Auburn's first mistake, was thinking that Hugh Freeze's tenure at Ole Miss 10 years ago was somehow an indication that he would be the guy to lift Auburn out of the hole that it was in. Self-inflicted in many ways, because Auburn hired Brian Harsin. So what about Hugh Freeze at Ole Miss made anyone think that he would be successful in the current SEC at Auburn in the year 2023, 2024, 2025, etc., if there is an etc.? Because his overall record at Ole Miss was 39-25. Not bad, not great, but his SEC record was 19-21. In 5 years at Ole Miss, he only had 2 winning SEC records. In 2014, he went 5-3. In 2015, he went 6-2. The other years, losing records in the league. So I didn't understand it at the time. I didn't understand why John Cohen and company thought that Hugh Freeze would be the man that Auburn needed to compete against Nick Saban and whoever followed Nick Saban, which was going to happen in short order. Didn't know it was going to happen that quickly after Freeze's first year at Auburn. But there was really not a lot of solid information, a factual trail of success that made you believe, at least it didn't make me believe, that he was the right guy for Auburn. And here we are. 30 games later, 2 years and 5 games into year 3, and Auburn is where it is. After a promising start with that win at Baylor, and then they took care of 2 teams that they should take care of even when the program's down, Ball State and South Alabama. Then they started to play big boy football, and they didn't measure up. And not only did they lose to Oklahoma 2 weeks ago, 24-17, not only did they lose to Texas A&M on Saturday, 16-10. It's not just the final scores. It's not just the results. You know, we always say you are what your record says you are. But sometimes you have to dig a little deeper. Sometimes you have to look a little closer. Sometimes you have to understand how they got to those results. Let's look at some of the numbers from the last 2 weeks. Numbers that are so ugly, so egregious. And you see the background picture there. It's I should have just put that picture up by itself, because there you have Xavier Chaplin, the transfer left tackle from Virginia Tech, looking down at Jackson Arnold, who's just been either sacked or tackled for a loss, while the Texas A&M defense enjoys another big play. But look at these numbers. Now, again, keep in mind, Hugh Freeze is the Auburn offensive coordinator. I know Derek Nix has the title, but Hugh Freeze is the architect of that offense. Hugh Freeze is the play caller. I don't care what they said in the offseason about this guy handles this down and this guy handles that down. Hugh Freeze is the boss of this offense. But it's same old, same old. 287 total yards against Oklahoma, 177 against Texas A&M. Keep in mind, the Oklahoma defense to date this season is much better than the Texas A&M defense. First downs, Auburn had 18 against Oklahoma, only 9 against Texas A&M. Third down conversions. You thought it was bad at Oklahoma? 3 for 15? How about 0 for 13 at Texas A&M? Not a single third down conversion, and you can't get a starker contrast than Alabama going to Georgia and converting 13 of 19 times on third down against a Kirby Smart defense. That is elite. The opposite of elite is what Auburn is doing on offense right now. Sacks. Auburn gave up 9. The number came out as 10 originally. They had to recalculate and redo the box score. It was actually 9, not much better. 9 sacks at Oklahoma, 5 sacks at Texas A&M. Tackles for loss, 13 at Oklahoma, 6 at Texas A&M. And penalties, 13 for minus 85 yards at Oklahoma, 10 for minus 69 yards at Texas A&M. The majority of these penalties have been on the offense. 8 of the 10 penalties at Texas A&M were on the Auburn offense. It was almost like watching a horror show, the sequel. And again, when you get down into the weeds and you really look at what Auburn is doing or trying to do, not getting done on offense, the fact that they went to College Station, they played a team that had given up plenty of rushing yards. I looked up the number. I don't have it in front of me. But Texas A&M's defense was not a lockdown, shut down, wrecking crew unit like it used to be back in the day going into that game. They just looked like it on Saturday. And what did Hugh Freeze say after the Oklahoma game? After all those sacks, after Jackson Arnold either held the ball too long or the offensive line didn't give him enough time, or the receivers didn't get open, whatever it was a combination. But after that, what did Hugh Freeze say last week? We have to run the ball more. We have to incorporate the tailbacks into the offense more. And I tweeted after the first quarter on Saturday, maybe someone should introduce Hugh Freeze to his tailbacks, Jeremiah Cobb and Damari Alston. Because Auburn, the school that gave you James Brooks and Joe Cribbs and Bo Jackson and Brent Fullwood and Kerryon Johnson and Rudy Johnson, and may Rudy Johnson rest in peace. Sadly, the news came out last week that he had passed away. He was a man when he was at Auburn. He was the SEC MVP back in 2000, Tommy Tuberville's second year at Auburn, when they went to the SEC championship game. Because until you got to Brian Harsin, every Auburn coach going back to Pat Dye did something special in his first or second year. That streak stopped with Brian Harsin, and it did not restart under Hugh Freeze. So after saying this, after saying Auburn was going to run the ball more, knowing that that is Auburn's DNA, that is in the soil at Auburn, to run the dang ball. You know how many times Auburn gave the ball to a tailback in the first quarter at Texas A&M? 0. None. Nada. Nothing. Why? Explain that. Make it make sense. And then for the entire game, a game that Texas A&M tried to gift to Auburn again and again and again, primarily by committing even more penalties for even more yardage than Auburn did. So the game was never out of reach on the scoreboard. For the entire game, Auburn's tailbacks got 8 carries. 8. Why? How? What kind of bizarro world are we living in? Where Auburn plays an entire SEC football game and its tailbacks get 8 carries. And they lose by 6 points. And their quarterback gets sacked 5 times. And their left tackle, Xavier Chaplin, the transfer from Virginia Tech, can't hear the snap count. Or so the reporting came from the sideline on the ABC broadcast, the ESPN broadcast. Same difference. Explain that. So whose offense is this? Again, this is Hugh Freeze's offense. There's only one person to blame. There's only one person responsible for this train wreck of offensive football that we've witnessed the last 2 weeks. Look at the numbers. Look at where Auburn ranks in the SEC in any number of critical offensive categories. Let's look at the SEC statistics and where Auburn stands in them after the first month of the season. Scoring offense, 12th. And again, there are 16 teams in the SEC. So if you're in double figures in any category, not good. They're 12th in scoring, 27.6 points a game. They're 14th in total offense, a little over 342 yards a game. They are 11th in rushing offense, 169 yards a game. They are 15th in passing offense, 173 yards a game. If you are 15th in passing offense and you're at least a little better in rushing offense, and the only reason you're just a little better is because you're not running the ball, maybe you should stop throwing the dang ball so much and give it to your tailbacks. Just a thought. Sacks allowed, Auburn is 16th and last in the SEC, as you might imagine. 21 sacks through 5 games for a minus 124 yards. And tackles for loss, they've given up 30 for minus 158 yards. That ranks them 14th. And I asked the question on Saturday during the game, and I'll repeat it here. Are we 100% absolutely positively sure that Billy Napier is the worst head coach / play caller in the SEC? Napier has deservedly gotten a lot of criticism for his continued insistence on calling the plays for the Gators when it's just not working. Hugh Freeze, same deal. His offense, his plan, his quarterback. And look, at some point, You have to admit when you're wrong. And Hugh Freeze was wrong about Peyton Thorne. He was wrong to single him out, to bring him out of the transfer portal before that first year at Auburn in 2023. And then he doubled down on his delinquency by sticking with Peyton Thorne for another year, a year ago. So obviously, Auburn had to go get a quarterback. They had a 5-star high school signee in Deuce Knight coming in, but they had to get a veteran. They had to get someone with experience. And especially if that experience were SEC experience. Now, it doesn't have to be SEC experience. Look what John Mateer's done in his time coming from Washington State to Oklahoma. And Brent Venables looks like he was right about Jackson Arnold. He wasn't the guy to be the guy for Oklahoma. He is the guy for Auburn, but he's not playing like it. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that, and it's not all on him. But he's just not getting it done. He's just not identifying, when he has time, open receivers. He's just not giving those receivers, like Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton, an opportunity to win a one-on-one battle with the ball in the air. I like my chances, especially with Cam Coleman at his size, with his athleticism. He almost looked bored on Saturday. I'm sure he wasn't, but he almost looked it. He dropped a ball he normally wouldn't drop. So those receivers have got to be getting frustrated because when they are open or when there is an opportunity for a 50-50 ball, Jackson Arnold's not delivering it. And he's not delivering it either because he's holding the ball too long, he's gun shy. The offensive line, it has him running for his life. Again, there are multiple pieces to this puzzle. But the full picture tells you it's not working. And Hugh Freeze said after the game on Saturday, during this bye week, they were going to evaluate everything about the offense, including who's calling the plays, including the design, including who's playing quarterback. It's hard to imagine him throwing Jackson Arnold under the bus at this point and making a change there, but guess who you're playing next? Georgia. Now, Georgia has to play Kentucky this week. Georgia's going to be angry. Georgia probably will still be angry when it goes to Auburn in 2 weeks because of what happened on Saturday night in Athens. Georgia's margin for error shrank because of that loss to Alabama. And Auburn has not beaten Georgia since, 2017 in the regular season. So you've got to do something different. We all know the definition of insanity, but that's what the Auburn offense looks like. The results have been insanely bad. The execution, insanely bad. The plan, insanely bad. None of it is working. You can't really put it on the running backs in the running game, though, because they haven't dedicated themselves to it. They did against Baylor. You think Dave Aranda is banging his head against the wall, watching how this season has played out, that he stayed in 2 high safeties and dared Auburn to run the ball in the first game, and Auburn did to the tune of 300-plus yards? You think he would have stacked the box had he known what was coming? So you can't really blame Jeremiah Cobb. He's been effective and efficient. He's had some explosive runs. You can't blame Damari Alston. He runs hard every time he gets the ball. But those guys, they're going to have to dust the cobwebs off those guys if they don't start giving them some work. So that's the offense, which is the heart of the problem. DJ Durkin's defense gave Auburn every opportunity to win the Oklahoma game until they couldn't get a last stop in the fourth quarter after Auburn took the fourth quarter lead. And then on Saturday, Texas A&M should have won that game by 2 touchdowns at least. And let's add one more while we're throwing logs on the fire, by the way, about the Auburn offense. So I did some figuring. And despite everything, despite the penalties, the self-inflicted wounds, Auburn had 4 possessions in the last 2 games in the fourth quarter with a chance to take the lead / win the game. They had one of those at Oklahoma, and they had 3 of those at Texas A&M. And in those, this is, you almost have to try to be this bad, unless you're playing the 85 Bears. And Oklahoma's defense, as good as it is not the 85 Bears. And Texas A&M's defense, as good as it looked on Saturday, gave up 40 points at Notre Dame. It's not the 85 Bears either. In the 4 possessions in the last 2 games in the fourth quarter, when Auburn had a chance to go down the field, score a touchdown, win the game, Oklahoma, their last possession, 7 plays, minus 8 yards. Texas A&M, 3 possessions in the fourth quarter to take the lead, win the game. First time, they went 3 plays, minus 4 yards. Second possession with 2:41 left, 3 plays, 0 yards. Incompletion, punt. And then Auburn got the ball back again with 1:47 left. They got off 4 snaps. They gained 3 yards. Total. They got to a 3rd and 1. What'd they do? Did they hand the ball to Jeremiah Cobb to get the first down, to stop the clock, to get a fresh set of downs? Oh, no. They threw a pass. And Jackson Arnold missed badly on a short hook route, I think it was. So now it's 4th and 1. Now you got to get a first down or the game's over. There's not a lot of time left, but there still is some time left. So what do you do on 4th and 1? Do you give the ball to Damari Alston to try to get that yard, get a fresh set of downs, keep the game alive, keep your hope alive? Are you kidding? It's Hugh Freeze. Of course, Jackson Arnold dropped back. And of course, Texas A&M blitzed, and it was a maroon avalanche. Jackson Arnold had no chance to even get the ball off. 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. Incompletion, sack. 4 possessions in 2 games to take the lead in the fourth quarter and win the game. They ran 17 plays for minus 9 yards. And among those 17 plays, 5 sacks, 4 incompletions. What are we even doing here? So why is Auburn's record under Hugh Freeze what it is? Let's look at the numbers. These numbers don't lie. Just the facts. Just the Hugh Freeze facts. Overall, Auburn is 14-16 in his tenure. In the SEC, 5-13. In one-score games, 2-8. Against ranked opponents, 1-10. Against ranked opponents on the road, 0-6. This is who Hugh Freeze is. Again, when a coach shows you who he is, believe him. Hugh Freeze had a losing SEC record at Ole Miss. He has an even worse losing record at Auburn. And Ole Miss wasn't in the greatest shape when he took over in Oxford. And yes, he improved the program until it all blew up for reasons on and off the field, primarily off the field. We're not going to get into that. That's the past. Everybody gets a chance for redemption, or should. But look at what Lane Kiffin has done in Oxford. Look at where the Rebels are now. There were some people at Auburn that were smart enough when they went looking for a coach to replace Brian Harsin to take a hard look at Lane Kiffin. And they wanted Lane Kiffin. And they were led to believe that Lane Kiffin wanted to take the Auburn job. They were, my sources, people I talked to that had a reason to know what was happening during that search, were convinced that Lane Kiffin was going to be the next coach at Auburn. You'll remember a Mississippi reporter actually said it, reported it as fact that it was happening. And Lane Kiffin then after the Egg Bowl went after the reporter. And what we didn't know at the time, and we learned shortly thereafter, was the pressure that his daughter Landry brought to bear, telling him, look, you ghosted me once. You changed jobs on me before. and she had just moved to Oxford to finish her high school career and go to Ole Miss as a college student, and you're going to do it again? You're going to go to Auburn? I like it here in Oxford. I don't want to go to Auburn. And in the very, very good E60 documentary on Lane Kiffin's life, 1 hour wasn't nearly enough to really touch on all that. And by the way, as good as that documentary was, man, did they gloss over his departure from Alabama. It wasn't just because, as Nick Saban said, he couldn't focus on two jobs at once. And you'll remember at the end of the 2016 season, Alabama was going to play Clemson in the national championship game. Kiffin had already accepted the Florida Atlantic head coaching job. And unlike every other coach at Alabama that was in that situation, including Kirby Smart, who could handle it, Lane Kiffin didn't handle it. And there's a lot more to that story. And again, we're not getting into it here. Man, they glossed over that in the documentary. But I understand they only had an hour. So, but look at what Lane Kiffin's doing in Oxford. Just took care of LSU. LSU fraud. An absolute fraud as a top 5 program. They weren't a top 5 program. Their offense is horrible. Garrett Nussmeier's gone backwards. Brian Kelly's blaming everybody but himself. But guess who's 3-0 in the SEC? Guess who's the only 3-0 team in the SEC right now? The Ole Miss Rebels, coached by Lane Kiffin. The guy that Auburn smartly went after, but they weren't able to close the deal. The family ties were too strong. The pressure from his daughter was too much. And Lane Kiffin made probably one of the most mature decisions of his life by sticking with Ole Miss, by committing to his family, by committing to be an in-person parent, as he said in that documentary. So that was an unfortunate set of circumstances from Auburn's perspective. They did the right thing trying to go after him. He would have been, well, I will just say this. We don't know exactly what would have transpired. It's always hard to know exactly how a coach would have done at any particular job at any particular time. However, there are plenty of clues. And you think Lane Kiffin couldn't have done at Auburn what he's doing at Ole Miss, given the relative histories and traditions of those two programs? They're not even close. Auburn has been far more successful than Ole Miss in football in the modern era in my lifetime. And my lifetime goes back a few years. So Auburn went for, instead of getting Lane Kiffin, they went for Timu Gus Malzahn. And this is what you get. 14-16 overall, 5-13 in the SEC. Where do they go from here? Here's the schedule. Here's the remaining schedule. And this is the story. And there he is. He's back. I once heard, I think it was Robin Williams, comedian, said, only 2 things are going to survive a nuclear holocaust: cockroaches and Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. I would add Bobby Petrino to that list. Despite everything that man has done, despite the wreckage he's left behind at every program he's coached, he is now the interim head coach at Arkansas, because Arkansas wasted no time after that debacle against Notre Dame on Saturday in Fayetteville. They fired Sam Pittman. And, you know, you can agree that it's time for a change and but still feel really bad for the person. Sam Pittman, I haven't spent much time around him, but I got to say, from all accounts, just a good dude who loved that job, loved that school, loved that state, poured everything he had into it. It just didn't work. It worked at first, but it just went wrong. And once it starts to go wrong, it's hard to turn it back in the right direction. So here's Bobby Petrino as the interim coach at Arkansas. And why is that relevant to Auburn? Well, if you know anything about the history of Auburn, you know Bobby Petrino has played a rather prominent place in it. Look at the games. First of all, let's just say the games that Auburn still has to play. And again, every SEC school is playing the same teams they played last year in the conference. They're playing them again, just flopping home and home. But look what Auburn did in its last game against each of its remaining opponents. Georgia, lost. Last year against Missouri, lost. Last year against Arkansas, lost. Last year against Vanderbilt, lost. Last year against Alabama, lost. Now, Georgia is not as good as it was last year. I think we can at least reach that conclusion at this point. Missouri looks better than last year. Arkansas, looks worse. Vanderbilt looks better than last year, and Alabama better buckle up on Saturday when the Commodores roll into Tuscaloosa. Alabama looks better than last year because they just went on the road and looked like a championship team in Athens. And Ty Simpson looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And if you listened to Scarbo Knows, you would have already known that he had that potential, that he's been moving in that direction. But the game that I have my eye on more than any other one on the Auburn schedule for the rest of the year is October 25th in Fayetteville, Arkansas. And here's why. Bobby Petrino, of course, was one of the villains of Jetgate. At the end of the 2003 season, Auburn fired Tommy Tuberville. They just neglected to tell Tommy Tuberville. They had already flown surreptitiously on a private jet across the river from Louisville, across the Ohio River, met with Bobby Petrino. They were going to hire Bobby Petrino to replace Tommy Tuberville. Petrino had been at Auburn for only 1 year, 2002, as the offensive coordinator. So he went full Phil Fulmer, Johnny Majors, stabbing his former boss in the back. Didn't work out. So what's interesting about this, though, is the history of Auburn coaches on the hot seat in Arkansas. Back in 2008, Petrino was the coach at Arkansas. Tommy Tuberville was on the hot seat. Arkansas went to Auburn, and Petrino beat his old boss and helped push him toward the door. That was Tuberville's last year at Auburn. 2012, this was the season after Petrino's motorcycle accident, his lies that caught up to him about an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. He gets fired, so they hire an interim coach, John L. Smith, one of the wackiest guys we've ever seen in college football. John L's coaching Arkansas. They're not really good, but they go to Auburn, and they beat Gene Chizik and the Tigers. And so an interim coach at Arkansas helped push an Auburn coach toward an exit. So here we are all these years later, and Arkansas has another interim coach, just happens to be Bobby Petrino, and very possibly, probably, likely, at the end of October, if Auburn doesn't figure something out offensively, if Hugh Freeze doesn't come up with some brilliant adjustments during this bye week, he's going to be on the hot seat as much as he's been during his time at Auburn when they go to Fayetteville. And Bobby Petrino is going to be sitting there waiting for him. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. So here we are again. Auburn football. The fans deserve better. The fans deserve much better. They're as loyal a fan base as you will find in the United States of America. They will show up on October 11th for that night game against Georgia, and it will be an electric atmosphere. They will bring hope without reason in abundance. They will believe, despite all the reasons Hugh Freeze has given them not to believe, the Auburn family will show up and they will believe. And they will do their part to try to help Auburn beat one of its two main rivals, Georgia, for the first time since the 2017 regular season. Auburn deserves better. I'm not convinced that Hugh Freeze can give it to them. All right, that's going to do it for us here today on Scarbo Knows. I'm Kevin Scarbinsky. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you to executive producer Brendan Martin on the Sidelines.live network. And thank you to our sponsor, Money Management Services. See ya.
Since 1992, Money Management Services in Birmingham has provided individuals and business owners with trusted, fee-only financial advice. We're more than advisors, we're your financial family. From retirement planning to tax strategies and estate planning, our team builds personalized wealth management plans tailored to your life. At Money Management Services, we treat you like family because when you walk through our doors, you become part of ours.